Minus 40 degrees, where Celsius and Fahrenheit converge into a single, lethal number. Exposed skin freezes in under 5 minutes. Metal burns flesh on contact. Diesel fuel solidifies. This is the temperature where physics itself seems to turn against human survival. And yet, on the streets of Winnipeg, Minneapolis, and Moscow, people experiencing homelessness do not instantly freeze inside tents and makeshift shelters. This isn't magic. It isn't toughness. It's fragile temporary physics, and understanding it could save lives. But first, a critical truth: people do die in these conditions. Every winter, hypothermia claims, lives in encampments precisely because tents alone cannot defeat minus 40. What we're examining tonight isn't a survival guide, it's a harm reduction explanation of why death isn't instantaneous, and why that narrow window of physics creates both opportunity and terrible risk. This knowledge belongs to outreach workers, policymakers, and anyone who sees a tent in winter and wonders, how is anyone alive in there? The answer lies not in the tent fabric, but in urban heat islands, body heat dynamics, and the brutal mathematics of thermal decay. Let's begin with the physics misconception that kills, the belief that a tent blocks cold. Cold isn't an active force, it's the absence of heat. Your body generates approximately 100 watts of thermal energy at rest. In minus 40 air, that heat radiates away rapidly, unless slowed by insulation. A tent's primary function isn't warming, it's slowing heat loss. Standard polyester tent fabric provides minimal insulation R value under 0.5, but it accomplishes 3 critical things. It blocks wind, eliminating convective heat loss that would otherwise strip 70% of your body heat. It traps a thin layer of still air around your body. Air is an insulator when unmoving, and it reflects a small percentage of your body's infrared radiation back toward you. Alone, these effects might raise interior temperature 5 to 8 degrees above ambient, turning minus 40 into minus 35. Still lethal within hours. But in urban environments, tents rarely exist in isolation. They cluster near buildings, against walls, beneath bridges, locations where ambient temperature differs dramatically from official weather reports. This is the urban heat island effect, the invisible thermal geography that creates survivable microclimates within lethal cities. Official temperatures are measured in open areas away from structures, but a tent pitched against the north side of a brick apartment building experiences different physics. That brick absorbs solar radiation all day, storing thermal energy in its mass. At night, it radiates that heat slowly. Thermal imaging studies in Minneapolis show building walls maintaining surface temperatures 15 to 25 degrees warmer than ambient air at minus 30. A tent pressed against that wall designates heat through conduction, not enough to feel warm, but enough to shift interior temperature from minus 40 to minus 25. Add proximity to infrastructure, steam tunnels beneath sidewalks, electrical transformer hum, even the residual heat from a nearby 24-hour laundromat's exhaust vent. Meber juices create thermal oses measured in single degrees, but at minus 40, single degrees determine survival windows. A tent at minus 38 might allow 4 hours before core temperature drops to dangerous levels. At minus 32, 6 hours. That difference enables someone to wait for a shelter bed to open or for an outreach van to arrive. This isn't comfort. It's borrowed time purchased through urban thermodynamics. Now the human element. Body heat accumulation in confined spaces. A single person in a small tent, 36 cubic feet, generates 100 watts of heat. Physics dictates that in a sealed space with R05 insulation, that heat would raise air temperature approximately 3 to 5 degrees above ambient within 30 minutes, assuming no ventilation. But humans can't survive in sealed spaces. We exhale carbon dioxide and moisture. So tents require minimal airflow, creating constant heat exchange. However, multiple occupants change the equation dramatically. 2 people generate 200 watts. 3 generate 300. In an emergency winter encampment, with 4 people sharing one tent, body heat alone can raise interior temperature 10 to 12 degrees above ambient, turning minus 40 into minus 28 or minus 29. This isn't theoretical. During Winnipeg's 23.3 polar vortex, thermal cameras recorded interior tent temperatures averaging minus 26, when ambient hit minus 41, solely from body heat and strategic positioning against building walls. But this creates a brutal trade-off. The more bodies sharing heat, the faster carbon dioxide accumulates and condensation saturates insulation. Survival becomes a race between thermal gain and respiratory risk, a calculation no one should have to make. Critical nuance. Ground insulation determines whether body heat matters at all. At minus 40, frozen ground acts as a thermal sink with near infinite heat capacity. Lie directly on snow with only a tent floor beneath you, and conductive heat loss through your back will drop core temperature faster than any other vector, regardless of how many people share the tent. This is why experienced, unsheltered individuals prioritize ground insulation above all else. Flattened cardboard, R1 mellow per inch, crumpled newspaper traps air pockets, even plastic bags stuffed with dry leaves. These improvised materials create the elevation layer we discussed in previous episodes, breaking conductive contact with frozen earth. Without this layer, body heat vanishes into the ground within minutes. With it, that same heat accumulates in the airspace around occupants. Field observations from Denver's winter outreach teams show that individuals with adequate ground insulation survive 300% longer in extreme cold than those without, even when using identical tents. The tent fabric matters less than the barrier between body and earth. This isn't gear privilege. It's physics literacy that develops through brutal necessity. But here's what the physics doesn't save you from: moisture. Every breath releases vapor. At -40, that vapor freezes instantly on tent walls, sleeping bags, and clothing. Within 3 hours, a layer of frost coats every surface. That frost isn't inert, it actively conducts heat away from your body 400% more efficiently than dry fabric. Your sleeping bag's down clusters collapse under ice weight. Your base layers stiffen into frozen shells. Each movement fractures ice crystals against your skin, accelerating heat loss through microabrasions. This is why survival at -40 isn't measured in days. It's measured in hours before moisture accumulation negates all thermal gains. Outreach workers in Anchorage report that individuals surviving multiple nights at extreme cold invariably employ one brutal tactic. They leave their tents partially unzipped despite the cold. Accepting convective heat loss to prevent vapor saturation, they choose slower freezing over faster suffocation by their own breath. This isn't resilience, it's triage. And it fails regularly. Alaska's 2024 cold season documented 17 hypothermia deaths in encampments where individuals had survived previous cold snaps, their thermal strategies finally overwhelmed by cumulative moisture damage to insulation. We must confront the uncomfortable truth this physics reveals. Survival at -40 isn't about individual toughness. It's about proximity to civilization's waste heat. People don't survive extreme cold in wilderness tents. They survive in urban margins where infrastructure leaks thermal energy. A tent in a city park might reach -32. That same tent, 10 miles outside city limits, would stabilize near ambient -40, killing its occupant within 90 minutes. This geographic reality exposes homelessness not as a personal failure, but as forced proximity to society's thermal exhaust. People cluster near vents, walls, and infrastructure not by choice, but because physics leaves no alternative. And this proximity creates its own dangers. Carbon monoxide poisoning from improvised heaters, fire risk from candles, eviction by authorities who see encampments as blight rather than thermal necessity. The physics that enables fragile survival also traps people in lethal trade-offs: freeze slowly inside a tent, or face arrest for seeking warmth in public buildings. This isn't survivalism, it's systemic abandonment measured in degrees Celsius. So what does this physics demand of us? First, recognize that tents in extreme cold aren't housing. They're temporary thermal buffers buying hours until proper shelter access. Second, support harm reduction strategies that work with this physics outreach teams distributing closed-cell foam pads for ground insulation, mylar blankets for radiant heat reflection, and battery-powered carbon monoxide detectors. Third, advocate for 24/7 low-barrier shelters with no sobriety requirements, because the physics window between -40 and hypothermia leaves no time for intake interviews. Fourth, understand that why don't they just go to a shelter ignores reality. Many shelters close at 8 a.m. and reopen at 6 p.m., forcing people into daytime cold with damp, frozen gear. The thermal debt accumulated overnight cannot be repaid in 10 hours of shelter access. This isn't theoretical. It's why cities with 24/7 shelter access see 60% fewer cold weather deaths than those with limited hours, even at identical temperatures. Physics sets the boundaries. Policy determines whether people live or die within them. The tent at -40 isn't a symbol of resilience. It's a fragile interface between human metabolism and thermodynamic inevitability, a space where body heat briefly delays, but cannot defeat, the cold. People survive there not through strength, but through proximity to our building's wasted warmth, through knowledge gained by watching others freeze, and through luck measured in single-digit temperature differentials. And many don't survive at all. This physics lesson isn't about admiring survival. It's about recognizing that when society forces humans to rely on tent fabric against -40, we have already failed. The real question isn't, How do they survive? It's why must they? And the answer has nothing to do with physics and everything to do with